The station never really slept. Even in the deep hours of the night cycle, when the overhead lights dimmed to a soft blue and most of the residents retreated to their quarters, Caldenvale Station kept humming. Pipes ticked. Ventilation fans turned. Cargo loaders rolled slowly through the lower levels on their automated routes, carrying crates from one end of the station to the other without anyone telling them to stop. Finn Kane had learned to love that sound. The hum. It meant the station was alive, and when you were a small boy whose mother worked night shifts 3 times a week, a living station felt a lot better than a quiet one. He was 8 years old, thin for his age, with dark eyes that noticed things most people walked past. He didn't talk much, not because he was unhappy, but because he had learned early that watching was often more interesting than speaking. He kept a sketchbook with him everywhere he went, a battered brown one with a cracked spine that he had taped back together twice. The pages inside were full of everything he had seen on Caldenvale. The wide observation deck. The market corridor where 12 different species sold things from their home worlds. The engineering bay where sparks fell like slow orange rain. His mother, Nora, was a station medic. She was warm and steady and always smelled faintly of antiseptic, and she loved Finn in the quiet, practical way of someone who showed up every single time without needing to announce it. She packed his bag each morning, left his meals in the warmer when she had late shifts, and always made sure there were extra pencils in the drawer beside his bed. She didn't worry about Finn the way some parents worried about their children. She trusted him. He was careful, he was sensible, and he always came home. What she didn't know was that he had found a shortcut through the lower cargo bay. It saved him 11 minutes on the walk to the station's Common Learning Center, which didn't sound like much until you considered that 11 minutes was exactly enough time to stop at the observation window on the east corridor and do a proper sketch of whatever ship happened to be docked outside. To Finn, 11 minutes was significant. The cargo bay was not officially off-limits for residents, just unofficially ignored. It was loud and industrial, full of stacked containers and the smell of machine oil and recycled air, and the automated loaders moved through it on fixed paths that were easy enough to step around if you were paying attention. Finn had mapped the whole route in his head. He knew exactly where to walk. He had been cutting through it for 3 weeks without incident. On the 4th week he heard something that stopped him completely. It was a small sound. So small that the general noise of the cargo bay almost swallowed it entirely. If Finn had been anyone else, if he had been walking faster or thinking about something else, or wearing the kind of expression that meant he wasn't really looking at the world around him, he would have missed it without a second thought. But Finn was always looking. He stopped walking. He stood still in the middle of the wide cargo floor and listened. There it was again. A soft, broken sound. Not mechanical. Not the station. Something alive and something small, and something that was trying very hard not to be heard. He followed it slowly, moving between 2 tall stacks of sealed freight containers toward the far wall. The light was dimmer here, away from the main floor. The sound got a little louder with each step, and then Finn turned the corner around the last container and saw the source of it. The hatchling was pressed into the corner where the 2 walls met, wings folded tight over itself like a shell, making itself as small as it could possibly manage. Its scales were a dull, flat gray, not the deep polished black of the adult Vorkai that had been moving through the station's main corridors for the past 2 days, drawing stares and wide paths from everyone they passed. This one was small. Smaller than Finn had expected, not much bigger than himself, with a left forelimb that looked wrong even at a distance. Shorter than the right, thinner, the claws curled inward in a way that didn't look like a resting position but like something permanent. Its eyes were amber. Deep and bright, and at that moment, wide with shock at being found. The sound stopped immediately. The hatchling stared at Finn. Finn stared at the hatchling. For a moment neither of them moved. Finn could feel the hatchling deciding whether to bolt, whether to make itself bigger, whether to do something defensive. He could see it in the tension across those small folded wings. Finn did not step forward. He also did not step back. He looked at the hatchling for a moment the way he looked at things he wanted to draw, carefully, without rushing, and then he did something that surprised even himself. He sat down. Right there on the cargo bay floor, cross-legged, in the dim light behind the freight containers. He unzipped his bag. He took out his sketchbook. He found a pencil. He started drawing. Not the hatchling. He didn't want to make it feel watched. He drew the containers instead, the way they stacked unevenly toward the ceiling, the shadows between them, the single strip of light from the overhead panel catching the edge of the nearest crate. The hatchling did not move. A minute passed. Then 2. The cargo loaders rolled by somewhere on the main floor, their wheels steady and rhythmic on the metal ground. The ventilation hummed. Finn's pencil moved across the page in small careful lines. At some point, he wasn't sure exactly when, the soft broken sound started again. Quieter than before, almost nothing but there. The hatchling had stopped holding itself so rigidly. Its wings had dropped just slightly from their tight defensive position. Finn did not look up. He just kept drawing. He stayed for 40 minutes that morning. He missed the observation window and arrived at the learning center late and had to sit in the back row. He didn't mind at all. That evening, while Nora heated dinner and told him about a particularly stubborn patient who had refused to stay in bed despite a sprained joint, Finn sat at the kitchen table and thought about dull gray scales and amber eyes and a forelimb that curled inward without choice. He thought about the sound the hatchling had been making. He had heard that sound before or something like it. He had made it himself once, pressed against the wall of a station corridor on a day when everything felt too heavy and too large and he didn't know what to do with any of it. The sound of someone trying to disappear. He went to the cargo bay again the next morning, earlier than usual, with extra pencils in his bag and a second sketchbook he had traded a snack ration for at the station market. He told himself he wasn't sure the hatchling would be there. But he moved quickly and did not stop at the observation window. The hatchling was in the same corner. When Finn appeared around the edge of the last container, those amber eyes found him immediately, wary, uncertain, but not as shocked as the day before. It had known, maybe, that he might come back. It hadn't left. Finn sat down in the same spot he had sat in the day before. He thought that probably mattered. The same spot, the same distance, nothing different or surprising. He opened his sketchbook. He picked up his pencil. He slid the second sketchbook across the floor. Not close enough to crowd. Just within reach. He put a pencil beside it. The wider one with the softer grip. Then he went back to drawing without looking up, without waiting, without making it into anything that required a response. The hatchling looked at the sketchbook on the floor. It looked at Finn. It looked at the sketchbook again. Then, slowly, carefully, it reached out with its right forelimb, the good one, the strong one, and picked up the pencil. Finn kept his eyes on his own page. But he was smiling. He didn't know the hatchling's name yet. He didn't know anything about the Vorkai clan politics happening 3 levels above them, or the delegation meetings, or the quiet plans being made about what to do with a runt that didn't fit. He didn't know any of that. He just knew that the small gray hatchling in the corner had stopped crying, and was now holding a pencil for what was almost certainly the very first time in its life, and was staring at the blank page in front of it with an expression that Finn recognized immediately. The expression of someone who was about to make something. He turned to a fresh page himself. They drew together in the dim light of the cargo bay while the station hummed around them, and neither of them said a word, and it was one of the best mornings Finn could remember in a long time. The second morning felt different from the first. The first morning had been an accident. Finn had found something he wasn't looking for, and he had done the only thing that felt right, and then he had gone home and thought about it all evening. But the second morning was a choice. He packed the extra sketchbook. He traded his snack ration for it the evening before, standing at the small market stall near the east corridor and carefully picking the one with the most pages. He found the softest pencils in the drawer beside his bed, the wide ones, the kind that didn't need much pressure to leave a mark. He put everything in his bag with the same quiet care that Nora used when she packed his meals. He didn't tell himself a story about why he was doing it. He just did it. He moved quickly through the corridors that morning, past the observation window without stopping, down through the service passage and into the lower cargo bay before the automated loaders had completed their first morning route. The lights were still in their early cycle, slightly warmer than midday, casting long soft shadows between the stacked containers. Soren was there. He was in the same corner, in the same position, wings folded, left forelimb tucked close to his body. But his eyes moved to Finn the moment Finn appeared around the edge of the last container, and this time there was no shock in them. Just watching. Waiting to see what this strange small human would do. Finn sat down in his spot. Same distance. Same cross-legged position. He opened his own sketchbook first, found a blank page, picked up his pencil. Then, without making a production of it, he slid the new sketchbook across the floor toward Soren, followed by the wide soft pencil. He went back to drawing. Soren looked at the sketchbook. He looked at the pencil beside it. He looked at Finn, who was not looking at him. Then he reached out with his right claw and pulled the sketchbook closer. He picked up the pencil. The first attempt lasted about 4 seconds before the pencil snapped cleanly in half. Soren's right claw, while stronger than his left, was still a claw, built for gripping, tearing, holding things with force. The pencil was a thin wooden stick designed for a human child's fingers. The gap between those two things was significant. Finn heard the snap. He reached into his bag without looking up, produced another pencil and slid it across the floor. He kept drawing. Soren picked up the second pencil. He held it differently this time, looser, trying to find an angle that worked. He pressed it to the page. A line appeared, thick, dragged, nothing like the careful marks Finn made, but real. An actual mark on an actual page. Soren stared at it. He pressed the pencil down again. Another line. Then another, pressing too hard, and the pencil snapped again at the tip with a small sharp crack. Finn slid a third one across without comment. This time Soren looked at the way Finn was holding his own pencil. He watched for a moment, the loose grip, the angle, the light pressure, and then he tried to copy it as closely as a claw could copy fingers. It wasn't the same. It couldn't be the same. But something in the adjustment helped, because the third pencil survived, and the lines that came from it were slightly less destroyed than the ones before. They were still chaotic. Wild, heavy marks that went in unexpected directions, pressing too deep in some places and barely touching the page in others. Nothing that looked like anything in particular. Finn glanced over at the page. He nodded once, the way he nodded when he felt something was right, and went back to his own work. Soren kept going. It became a rhythm over the following days. Finn would arrive early. Soren would already be there or would appear shortly after. They would sit in their two spots, separated by a few feet of cargo bay floor, and they would draw. Finn worked on his own pages, detailed sketches of station life, careful studies of machinery and architecture, and the faces of species he observed from careful distances. Soren worked on his, filling the pages with heavy energetic marks that slowly, gradually, began to look like they were going somewhere. On the third day Soren drew something that was recognizably a shape. It was rough and lopsided, the lines crossing where they shouldn't, the proportions slightly wild. But it was a container, one of the freight containers stacked against the far wall. Finn could see what it was supposed to be without having to think about it or squint at it. The shape was there. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at Soren. He gave a single, firm nod. The kind that meant something. Soren looked down at the drawing. Something shifted in his expression. Something small and careful, like a door opening just a little bit in a room that had been shut for a long time. He drew another one. By the fourth day, Nora had noticed something different about Finn at dinner. Not different in a bad way, in the way that meant something good was happening that he hadn't told her about yet. She knew that look. She didn't push. She just asked how his day had been and listened to the general answer and quietly added an extra portion to his bag the next morning. Finn didn't see her do it. But he found it when he opened his bag in the cargo bay, and he split it evenly and slid half across the floor to Soren without comment. Soren looked at the food. He looked at Finn. He ate it slowly like he wasn't sure he was allowed to, and then went back to his sketchbook. On the fifth day Soren spoke. His common tongue was careful and halting, each word placed like someone stepping across wet stones, choosing the solid ones, avoiding the gaps. Finn had heard worse. Several of the station's younger residents were still learning common tongue and spoke it in exactly that careful, deliberate way. Soren pointed at himself with his right claw. "Soren," he said. "My name. In your words. Soren." Finn looked at him. "Finn," he said, pointing at himself. Soren repeated it quietly, just to hear the shape of it. Then Finn pointed at the sketchbook in Soren's lap and said, "Drawing." Soren looked at the word like it was something he wanted to hold. He said it back slowly. "Drawing." "Yeah," Finn said. Soren looked down at the pages he had filled. There were 7 of them now, front and back on most, covered in his heavy energetic lines. The containers, the ceiling, the shadows between the stacks, Finn's hands holding a pencil, a view of the cargo bay from the corner where Soren sat. None of them were clean or careful or technically correct in any way that a teacher would approve of. All of them were completely and immediately alive. Soren touched the edge of one page with the tip of his right claw, very lightly, the way you touch something you are not sure you are allowed to touch. He said something in Vorkai tongue. The small translation disc on Finn's collar hummed for a moment and rendered it quietly, in a flat mechanical voice that didn't carry any of whatever was in Soren's actual tone. "I made these." Not a question. Not exactly a statement either. Something between the two. Like someone checking whether a thing was real by saying it out loud. Finn looked at the pages. He looked at Soren. "Yeah," he said. "You made those." Soren was quiet for a moment. Then he looked back at the sketchbook and opened it to a fresh page and picked up his pencil again. He drew for a long time after that. Longer than usual, with a focus that was different from the days before, less uncertain, less like someone trying to figure out if they were allowed to be doing this. The lines were still rough, still wild, still nothing that anyone with formal training would look at and call skilled. But they were his. Every single mark on every single page was something that had not existed before Soren made it, The station had been here for decades. The containers had been here for years. The cargo bay floor had been walked by thousands of residents. None of them had left what Soren had left on those 7 pages. Finn picked up his own pencil and turned to a fresh page. Outside, the station hummed. The loaders rolled their slow routes. The lights moved through their cycle from warm morning toward the flat bright white of midday. Inside the dim corner behind the freight containers, a human boy and a dragon hatchling sat together on the floor and made things that had never existed before. And neither of them needed to say anything about it at all. It started with a name. Not Soren's name. Finn's own name, written on a piece of paper in plain clear letters, the way he had learned to write it when he was 4 years old, sitting at a small table in their old quarters on a different station, Nora guiding his hand with her steady fingers. He had written it so many times since then that it came out automatically, without thought, the way breathing came out automatically. He tore the page from his sketchbook carefully along the edge and set it on the floor between them. Soren looked at it. He looked at Finn. He looked at the paper again. Finn pointed at the letters. F, he said. I, and N. He said each one separately, clearly, giving each letter its own space. Then he pointed at himself. Finn. That's me. Written down. Soren tilted his head. His amber eyes moved from Finn's face to the paper and back again. He said nothing, but his expression was the expression of someone turning a thing over in their mind, looking at it from different angles, trying to understand what kind of thing it actually was. Finn tried again. He pointed at the letters, then at himself, then at the letters again. This, he said, tapping the paper, is me. Even if I leave the room. Even if I'm not here. This stays. Something shifted in Soren's eyes. He reached out and touched the paper with the tip of his right claw, tracing the shape of the letters without pressing hard enough to tear. He went slowly, following each line, each curve. His claw was too large and too sharp for the delicate shapes, but the care in the movement was obvious. He was reading with his hand the way very young children sometimes did, feeling the shape of the thing before the meaning arrived. Finn watched him without rushing. Then he wrote another word on a fresh piece of paper. He pushed it across the floor. S-O-R-N. 5 letters. He said each one aloud, the same way as before, giving each its own moment. Then he pointed at Soren. Soren went completely still. Not the stillness of confusion. A different kind, the stillness of someone who has just understood something that is larger than they expected it to be. His eyes were fixed on the paper. His breathing was visible in the slight movement of his chest, slow and careful. Finn gave him time. After a long moment, Soren picked up his pencil. He looked at the letters on the paper. He pressed the pencil to a blank page and tried to copy them. The first attempt was not close. The lines went in the wrong directions, too heavy in some places, completely missing the shape in others. The S looked like a jagged crack. The O was a rough, uneven loop. The R had too many angles. But Finn could see what Soren was trying to do, and that mattered more than the result. He said nothing critical. He just pointed at the paper with Soren's name on it, then at Soren's attempt, and made a small gesture with his hand that meant keep going. Soren tried again. The second attempt was slightly closer. The third was closer still. His right claw was not built for this kind of work. The precision required for letters was a completely different kind of precision from the broad energetic strokes he had been making in his drawings. But Soren was not someone who stopped when something was difficult. Finn had noticed that about him early. When the pencil snapped, he had kept going. When the lines went wrong, he had kept going. There was something in Soren that did not know how to give up on a thing once he had decided it mattered. On the 4th attempt, all 5 letters were present and recognizable. Finn nodded. Firm and clear. The nod that meant something. Soren looked at his own name on the page. He looked at it for a long time in the same way he had looked at his first drawings, that checking look, the one that asked whether the thing was real. Then he asked, in his careful halting common tongue, what the letters meant. Not the sounds, he understood the sounds. He meant something else. He was asking why letters existed. What they were for. Why someone had invented them in the first place. It took Finn a moment to figure out how to answer that with simple words. He thought about it the way he thought about drawings, starting with the most basic shape and building from there. Words disappear, he said finally. When you say something, it's gone after. You can't hold it. You can't keep it. He paused. But if you write it down, it stays. Even when you're sleeping. Even when you're far away. Even when you're gone. He tapped the paper with Soren's name on it. This doesn't disappear. This stays here. Tomorrow, next week, 10 years from now, this page still says your name. Soren was quiet for a moment. Then he asked slowly whether that meant the person was remembered, Finn thought about it. Yeah, he said. Something like that. What happened next was not something Finn expected. Soren set down his pencil. He sat back slightly, wings settling against his back, and his expression shifted into something that Finn couldn't immediately read. It wasn't sadness exactly. It was something flatter and older than sadness, the expression of someone describing a fact rather than a feeling. He told Finn in pieces, working through the gaps in his common tongue with patience, that in Vorkai culture, legacy was carried through flame chant. Warriors who fought bravely were remembered in the chants, their names spoken at every clan gathering, passed from elder to hatchling through voice and ceremony. The chants were how the dead stayed present, how the Vorkai kept their history alive. But the flame chants were for warriors. Only warriors. Finn listened without interrupting. Soren said it plainly, without drama, the way someone states a rule they have known their whole life. Runts were not chanted. Hatchlings who could not hold weapons, could not fight, could not fulfill the warrior purpose. They were not remembered in the formal sense. They lived and they were cared for in basic ways, but when they were gone completely. No chant. No ceremony. No names spoken at gatherings. No legacy. Finn sat with that for a moment. He thought about what it meant, to know from the very beginning of your life, that the culture you were born into had already decided you were not worth remembering. Not because of anything you had done or failed to do. Simply because of the forelimb you had been born with. The body you had arrived in. He thought about Soren drawing his name on that page, the careful, concentrated effort, the fourth attempt when all 5 letters finally appeared in the right order. He thought about the way Soren had looked at it afterward. Like someone who had never seen their own name written before. Because he hadn't. Finn picked up his pencil. He tore a fresh page from his sketchbook and placed it on the floor between them. He looked at Soren. Then we'll make one, he said. Simple and quiet. Start with your name. Soren looked at the blank page. He looked at Finn. There was a long pause, not an uncertain pause but the kind that comes before something that matters, when a person is gathering themselves for it. Then Soren picked up his pencil and bent over the page and began. He wrote slowly. Far more slowly than he had in any of his attempts before. This was not practice. He wasn't trying to copy. He was writing. Really writing, with intention, forming each letter like it was load-bearing, like the whole thing would fall apart if one of them was wrong. Careful. Deliberate. Oh. The loop steadier than it had ever been. R. 3 strokes, placed with attention. E. 2 horizontals, 1 vertical, the spacing considered. And the last one. He held the pencil still for a moment before making it, and then he did, and it was right. He sat back. On the page, in rough but unmistakable letters, was his name. Not copied from Finn's paper this time. Written from memory, written by choice, written because he had decided to write it. The cargo bay hummed around them. A loader rolled by somewhere on the main floor, its wheels steady on the metal ground. The ventilation cycled. The lights stayed where they were. Soren looked at his name on the page. And for the first time since Finn had found him in this corner, crying quietly where no one could hear, the expression on Soren's face was not the expression of someone waiting to be forgotten. It was the expression of someone who had just made sure they wouldn't be. Finn said nothing. He just picked up his pencil, turned to his own page and kept drawing. Some moments didn't need words. This was one of them. Finn heard it by accident. That was the thing about being small and quiet on a busy station. People forgot you were there. Not in a cruel way, not most of the time, just in the ordinary way that adults forgot about children when they were focused on something else. Finn had learned this early and had never tried to change it. Being forgettable had its uses. He was sitting on the floor of the supply corridor just outside the main maintenance office, back against the wall, sketchbook open in his lap, drawing the water pipe that ran along the ceiling. It was a good pipe, wide, old, with patches welded over it in 3 places that each told a small story about something that had gone wrong years ago. Finn liked drawing things that had history in them. The 2 station workers came around the corner talking the way people talked when they thought no one was listening. Comfortable and careless, voices at normal volume, not looking at the floor where a small boy was sitting with a pencil. They were talking about the Vorkai departure schedule. Finn did not look up from his drawing. The departure was in 3 days, one of them said. The delegation manifest had been filed that morning. Full head count confirmed and logged. The other one made a short sound. Said something about the hatchling. Said the name Soren the way someone says a name they've heard mentioned in passing. Not a person to them, just a detail in a logistical conversation. Said the hatchling wasn't on the manifest. Said the clan elder had confirmed it. Said the word that the translation disc on Finn's collar rendered, in its flat mechanical voice, very quietly as, abandoned. The workers moved on down the corridor, still talking, voices fading, not knowing they had left anything behind. Finn sat very still on the floor with his pencil in his hand. He looked at the drawing in his lap. The water pipe with its 3 welded patches. He had been about to add the shadows beneath the first patch, the way the light from the overhead panel caught the edge of the metal and made a thin bright line. He closed the sketchbook. He sat there for a while longer, not drawing, not moving, just sitting with what he had heard and letting it settle into its actual shape. He wanted to make sure he had understood correctly. He turned the words over and looked at them from every angle, the way he looked at objects he was about to draw, checking proportions, checking whether what he was seeing was really what was there. The hatchling was not on the manifest. The elder had confirmed it. Abandoned. He had understood correctly. He went home and ate dinner and answered Nora's questions about his day in the normal way, not mentioning what he had heard. He didn't decide not to tell her. It wasn't a decision exactly. It was more that the words stayed inside him and didn't find their way out, and Nora, who knew the difference between Finn being troubled and Finn processing something, gave him space and didn't push. He lay in bed that night and stared at the ceiling. He thought about telling Soren. He thought about what Soren's face would look like if he did. He thought about the flat, factual way Soren had described the flame chant, the no legacy rule, the way he had stated it without drama, like someone reciting a rule they had known their whole life. He thought about how much practice it must have taken to talk about your own erasure in that calm, ordinary tone. How many times Soren must have said it to himself before it came out sounding like just a fact. He thought about the way Soren had written his name on that page. The slowness of it. The care. He decided he would not tell him. Not because the truth didn't matter, but because there were 3 days left, and Finn had something more useful to do with 3 days than spend them watching Soren absorb a blow that he couldn't do anything about. There would be time for hard truths. But not yet. Not while there was still something that could be done. He arrived at the cargo bay earlier than usual the next morning. Soren was already there, sketchbook open, pencil moving. He looked up when Finn appeared and made the small sound he made as a greeting, low and brief, the Vorkai equivalent of a nod. Finn sat down. He pulled more paper from his bag than he usually brought, a thick stack, more than they could realistically use in one morning. He set it between them. Then he picked up a fresh pencil and pointed at Soren's sketchbook. Letters today, he said. All of them. Soren looked at him. There was something in Finn's tone that was different from usual, not urgent, not alarmed, but steadier somehow, the way a person gets steady when they have made a decision. Soren couldn't have named what it was. He just felt the difference, the way animals feel changes in air pressure before weather arrives. He turned to a fresh page without asking questions. They worked through the alphabet in order. Finn wrote each letter clearly on a piece of paper, said its sound, showed how the pencil moved to make it. Soren copied each one. Once, twice, however many times it took until the shape was reliable. His right claw had gotten better at this over the past weeks, had found angles and grips that worked, had learned to modulate pressure in a way that the pencil survived. He still broke one occasionally, but not every few minutes like the early days. Finn was patient in a way that went beyond his 8 years. When a letter went wrong, he didn't sigh or redirect with any kind of weight on the correction. He just pointed at the original, then at the copy, and made the small gesture that meant try again, in exactly the same tone every time, without frustration building in it. Soren had been waiting, in the early days, for the frustration to arrive. For the moment when the human boy's patience ran out and the real response emerged. It hadn't arrived. After a while, Soren had stopped waiting for it. They worked for 2 hours that first morning. Then Finn came back in the afternoon, something he hadn't done before, and they worked for another hour. Soren didn't comment on this. He just moved over slightly to make room and picked up his pencil. On the second day, Finn brought food without being asked, more than usual, and they ate while they worked. He guided Soren's claw through difficult letters. The ones with curves that kept collapsing, the ones with multiple strokes that needed to connect at the right angle. He held Soren's claw lightly, not gripping, just indicating direction, and Soren let him, which was its own kind of trust. They wrote words. Simple ones first. Station. Floor. Light. Sky. Star. Then harder ones. Remember. Survive. Remain. Finn chose the words deliberately, though he didn't explain why. Soren worked through each one without asking for the reasons behind them. He was focused in a way that had intensity without anxiety, the focus of someone who understood, on some level, that the thing they were doing mattered. On the evening of the second day, Nora found Finn awake past his sleep cycle, sitting at the kitchen table with a fresh sketchbook open and a pencil in his hand, staring at nothing. She sat down across from him. She asked gently what was going on. He told her what he had heard in the corridor. She was quiet for a long moment. Her medic's face, the one that didn't react before it had processed, settled into something careful and serious. Then she put on her jacket and told Finn to go to bed. He asked where she was going. She said she was going to speak with Elder Draven. He asked what she was going to say. She looked at him for a moment. The truth, she said. That's usually the only thing worth saying. She came back an hour later and Finn was still awake. She sat on the edge of his bed and told him that some things took longer than 3 days to change, but that didn't mean they couldn't change. She said it quietly and meant it the way she said things she actually believed. Finn nodded. He didn't ask for more than that. The third day, the last day before departure, Finn arrived at the cargo bay to find Soren already there, earlier than either of them had ever arrived. He had clearly been there for some time. There were pages spread around him, filled front and back with letters and words, practice runs, attempts, corrections made directly on the page without starting over. Finn sat down. They worked until the station lights began their long, slow move toward the dim blue of night cycle. Then Finn said goodnight and gathered his things. He looked back once from the corner of the last container. Soren was still there, bent over a fresh page, pencil moving with slow and absolute care. He did not look up. He was writing something, one word, taking his time with each letter the way you take time with something that has to be right. Finn did not stay to see what the word was. He went home and lay in his bed and looked at the ceiling, and hoped with everything in him that 3 days had been enough. Finn woke up before his alarm. He lay in bed for a moment staring at the ceiling, the way he had done every morning for the past 3 days, but this morning felt different from the others. Heavier somehow. The kind of morning that already knows what it is before you are fully inside it. He got up quietly. Nora was still sleeping. Her shift had ended late and she needed the rest. He moved through the small quarters without turning on the main light, found his bag by the door, checked that the sketchbook was inside. His hand rested on it for a moment before he zipped the bag closed. He stood in the dark kitchen for a little while. He thought about going to the cargo bay first, the way he always did. Same route, same shortcut, same corner behind the freight containers. But something told him this morning was not a cargo bay morning. Something had shifted, the way the air on the station shifted slightly before a docking bay opened. A pressure change, subtle, that your body noticed before your mind did. He went to the observation deck instead. He didn't know why exactly. He just went. The observation deck on the east side of Caldenvale Station was the widest open space on the residential level. A long curved room with a floor-to-ceiling viewport that looked out into open space. In the early morning cycle the room was usually empty. Most residents came here in the evening to watch ships arrive and depart, to stand in the blue dark and look at the stars. In the morning it belonged to the quiet people, the ones who needed space before the day got loud. Finn pushed open the door and stopped. Soren was already there. He was standing close to the viewport, facing the glass, the star field spread out behind him in every direction. White points of light against absolute black, the arm of a distant station visible as a faint curve to the left, a dock transport ship sitting still and enormous just beyond the docking ring. Soren looked small against all of that. Small and very still, his wings folded flat against his back, his left forelimb tucked close to his side the way it always was, his right forelimb held in front of him. He was holding something. A single piece of paper, folded once. He was holding it in both forelimbs, the weak left one and the strong right one, both of them together, the way you hold something you don't want to drop. His claws were trembling. Not dramatically. Just slightly, the way hands tremble when you have been holding something tightly for a long time, or when you are about to do something that you have been building up to and now the moment is actually here. He heard Finn come in. He turned around. His amber eyes found Finn immediately, the way they always did, with that direct and steady focus that Finn had come to know over the past weeks. But this morning there was something different in them. Something that had been placed there carefully and was being held with effort. They looked at each other across the empty observation deck. Neither of them spoke. Then Soren walked toward him. Slowly, deliberately, each step placed with the kind of care that meant something. He stopped when he was close, closer than their usual cargo bay distance, close enough that Finn could see the individual scales along Soren's jaw, the slight unevenness in the folded left forelimb, the way the viewport light caught the dull gray of his scales and turned them, just slightly, silver. He held out the folded paper. Both forelimbs extended. Trembling. Offering. Finn looked at it. He looked at Soren's face. Then he reached out and took the paper carefully, the way you take something that matters, and held it for a moment before opening it. He unfolded it slowly. The paper was one of the pages from the sketchbook Finn had given him. He could tell by the slight texture of it, the faint gray lines. It had been torn out carefully, along the edge, the way Finn had shown him in the first week when demonstrating how to remove a page cleanly without ruining the binding. In the center of the page, in letters that took up most of the space, not cramped into a corner but placed in the middle, deliberately like something that deserved room, was a single word. Finn stared at it. The letters were not perfect. They never were, and Soren had never pretended they needed to be. The F was slightly wide, the first stroke a little longer than it should have been. The two ends were not identical. The second one was more careful than the first, as if Soren had noticed the difference halfway through and slowed down. The I was straight and clean and exactly right. But they were not the letters of someone who had copied something. These were the letters of someone who had known what they were writing before the pencil touched the page. Someone who had written this word because they had decided to write it, out of everything they could have written, out of all the words they had practiced over the past weeks. Station, floor, light, sky, star, remember, survive, remain, out of all of those, this was the one on the paper. Finn stood very still. Soren spoke. His common tongue was still careful, still the stepping across stones kind, but steadier than it had been in the early days. He had been practicing that too in the quiet hours, finding the words and testing them. He said that Finn had told him writing was how words survived. How something stayed even when you were gone. How you could make sure a thing remained, past the moment, past the room, past the distance between places. He paused. He said he had thought about what word to write. He had thought about it for a long time, since the night Finn had explained what legacy meant, maybe before that. He said he had practiced many words. He had written all of them correctly, eventually. He could write them all. But when he thought about which word he most needed to survive, which word he would choose if he could only choose one to be the word that stayed, there was only one answer. He said he wanted the first word he ever really wrote, not copied, not practiced, but chose, to be the name of the person who made him believe he was worth remembering. The observation deck was completely silent. Finn looked at the paper in his hands. He looked at the 4 letters in the center of the page, placed there with care and intention by a claw that had snapped pencils in the early days and had kept going anyway. His eyes filled up. He didn't try to stop it. He sat down on the floor of the observation deck, right there in front of the viewport with the stars behind it, and he cried. Not loudly. Not in the way that demanded attention or comfort. Just quietly, the way you cry when a feeling is too large for your body to carry standing up, when something has reached all the way in and found a place you didn't know was that open. Soren sat down beside him. Not touching, not speaking. Just there. The same way Finn had been there on the first morning in the cargo bay, present, steady, not requiring anything from the moment except to be in it. Nora had followed Finn at a distance that morning, woken by the sound of him moving through the quarters in the dark, reading in his stillness at the door the particular quality of a day that needed a parent nearby even if the child didn't ask. She stood in the doorway of the observation deck and did not come in. She pressed her hand flat against the door frame and watched her son sitting on the floor with a dragon hatchling beside him and a piece of paper in his hands, and she did not make a sound. Elder Draven was also there. He had come to collect Soren. The departure window was in 2 hours. He had tracked the hatchling to this deck through the station's resident location system, had arrived at the doorway a moment after Nora, had registered her presence with a brief glance and then returned his attention to the room. He watched. He saw the paper in the small human boy's hands. He saw his grandson sitting on the floor of a station observation deck beside a human child who was crying without shame, in the clear light of the morning cycle, with the stars visible through the viewport behind them. He crossed the room. His footsteps were quiet for something his size. He stopped in front of Finn and held out one large scarred hand, not demanding, waiting. Finn looked up. He looked at Draven's face for a moment. Then he placed the paper in the elder's open hand. Draven looked at the word on the page. 4 letters. Written by a runt who could not hold a weapon on a station far from home, in a script that was not Vorkai, in a language that was not Vorkai, choosing to make permanent the name of a human child who had sat down beside him in a cargo bay and simply stayed. Elder Draven had lived for over 100 years. He had led warriors into engagements that the clan still chanted about. He had buried clan members and spoken their flame chants himself, his voice carrying their names into permanence. He had an expression he had worn for most of those 100 years, the expression of a Vorkai elder, unreadable, closed, the face of someone who had decided long ago that composure was the same thing as strength. That expression did not hold. Something moved through it, slow, unstoppable, the way weather moves through open country. It crossed his scarred face and changed it, briefly, into the face of something much older than a clan elder. Something that recognized without wanting to what was on that page. He stood there holding the paper and did not speak for a long time. Nobody moved. The observation deck was completely still. Nora stood in the doorway with her hand against the frame. Finn sat on the floor with his eyes on Elder Draven's face. Soren sat beside Finn, wings flat, amber eyes steady, watching the elder the way prey watches something large, not with fear exactly, but with the full attention of something that understands the moment matters. Draven stood with the paper in his scarred hands and looked at the word on it. The station hummed around them. Somewhere far below, the cargo loaders continued their slow automated routes. The ventilation cycled. A ship moved silently past the viewport, its running lights blinking in the dark, enormous and unhurried, going wherever it was going without any awareness of the small room it was passing. Draven turned the paper over. He looked at the back, blank, just the plain texture of sketchbook paper. He turned it to the front again. 4 letters. A child's name, written by a hatchling's claw in the center of the page with deliberate care. He folded it. Not carelessly. Carefully, along the original crease, the way you fold something you intend to keep. He placed it inside his chest armor, in the inner pocket where Vorkai elders carried objects of ceremonial significance, small things carried close. Finn didn't know what that pocket was for. But he saw the deliberateness of it, the way Draven's hand rested briefly over the spot after, and he understood that the paper was not being put away. It was being kept. Draven looked at Soren. Soren looked back at him without looking away, which was its own kind of courage, and everyone in the room knew it. The elder said something in Vorkai tongue. Low, short, direct. His voice had the texture of something that had been used to giving orders for a very long time, but the words, when Finn's translation disc rendered them, came out as something he had not expected from an elder who had worn that unreadable face for 3 days straight. The disc rendered it as, "You were not smoke after all." Soren's expression shifted. Just slightly. The door that had opened a little in the cargo bay on the day he first wrote his name, it opened wider now. Not all the way, but wider. Draven turned and walked out of the observation deck without another word. Finn looked at Soren. Soren looked at Finn. Neither of them was entirely sure what had just happened, except that something had, and it was large and it was real. Nora let out a breath she had been holding for what felt like a long time. The departure bay was full 2 hours later. The full Vorkai delegation was assembled, 12 warriors in full ceremonial formation, armor polished, weapons secured, standing in the precise arrangement that Vorkai protocol required for official departures. Station staff moved around the edges of the bay completing final checks. A small crowd of residents had gathered at the viewing rail above, drawn by the rare sight of a full Vorkai departure formation. Finn stood with Nora near the side wall, holding his bag in both hands. Elder Draven walked to the front of the formation and turned to face his delegation. He stood with his hands behind his back, his posture the posture of someone who had done this many times, who knew how to fill a space with authority just by standing in it correctly. He spoke in Vorkai tongue. Formal, measured, each sentence placed with weight. The translation disc on Finn's collar worked quietly, rendering the words in its flat mechanical voice. But even without the translation, anyone watching would have understood that this was not a routine departure address. The warriors in formation were too still. Their eyes moved briefly to Soren, standing slightly apart from the group, and then back to Draven. Several of them had the expression of people hearing something unexpected and working to keep their faces from showing it. Draven said that a member of their clan had done something that no Vorkai had done in all of their recorded history. He said that Soren, hatchling of the Vorkai, had created a written artifact, had taken marks on paper and made them carry meaning, made them carry a name, made them carry intention. Had done this through effort and patience and the kind of persistence that the Vorkai had always honored in their warriors, the same quality, expressed through a different instrument. He said that the artifact would be taken home and placed in the clan's ceremonial archive. That it would be preserved and protected. That it would be the first object in the archive that was not a weapon, not an armor piece, not a battle record, but a piece of paper with a word on it, made by a hatchling who could not grip a blade but had found something else to do with his claws. He said that Soren would be returning home with the delegation. One of the senior warriors began to speak. Draven looked at him. The warrior stopped. Draven said, in a tone that left no further space for discussion, that the clan did not leave behind members who had already contributed more to Vorkai history than most warriors managed in a full lifetime. The formation was silent. Finn exhaled slowly. Soren, standing slightly apart from the group, was looking at the floor. Not in shame, in the way someone looks down when a feeling is moving through them that is too large to look up through. His right claw was pressed flat against his side. His left forelimb, the weak one, the one that had curled inward since birth, was still. After a moment he looked up. He found Finn across the departure bay. He held the look for a long moment. Finn nodded. The firm, clear nod. The one that meant something. Draven approached them before the boarding began. He walked directly to where Finn and Nora stood, stopped in front of them, and looked down at Finn with the dark, steady eyes that had been unreadable for most of the past 3 days. They were not unreadable now. They were the eyes of someone who had spent 100 years being certain about things, and had recently been made less certain, and had decided that this was not a weakness. He looked at Nora briefly. A look that carried acknowledgement, not apology because that was not Vorkai, but acknowledgement of the kind that one person gives another when they have looked at something clearly and know what they saw. Then he looked back at Finn. He reached out and placed his hand on top of Finn's head. One enormous scarred hand, placed carefully, briefly, with a gentleness that sat strangely on something that large and that old. He held it there for 3 seconds. Then he removed it and stepped back. Nora made a quiet sound. She had looked up the gesture that morning after Finn had described it to her from a story he'd read about Vorkai customs. The hand on the head, given only to those considered worthy of being remembered by the clan. She had found the reference in the station's cultural database and read it twice to make sure she had understood correctly. She had understood correctly. Finn stood very straight. He didn't fully know what the gesture meant, not precisely, not the formal definition, but he felt what it meant, the way you feel the weight of something true without needing the explanation first. He reached into his bag. He took out the sketchbook, the original one, the battered brown one with the cracked spine taped back together twice, the one that had started all of this, the one he had been carrying everywhere since before they came to Caldenvale Station. He held it out to Soren, who had crossed the bay and was standing in front of him now with those amber eyes that had gone from frightened to something else entirely over the course of 3 weeks. Soren looked at the sketchbook. He looked at Finn. Finn pushed it forward slightly. The gesture that meant, "This is yours." Soren took it in both forelimbs. The weak left one and the strong right one, both of them together, holding the sketchbook against his chest the way he had held the folded paper on the observation deck, like something he was not going to let go of. He didn't say anything. There wasn't a word in common tongue or Vorkai or any language on the station that would have fit inside the moment without making it smaller. So he said nothing and Finn said nothing, and it was exactly right. The boarding signal sounded through the departure bay. The delegation began to move. Soren turned and walked toward the ship. At the boarding ramp he stopped once and looked back. Finn raised one hand. Soren held the sketchbook up slightly, just for a moment, and then turned and walked aboard. The ramp closed. The docking seals engaged. The observation windows above the departure bay filled with residents watching the Vorkai ship begin its undocking sequence, the docking clamps releasing one by one with deep resonant clunks that traveled through the station's hull. The ship moved out into the dark. Finn watched it until it was gone. That evening, Nora came home to find Finn sitting at the kitchen table with a brand new sketchbook in front of him, clean, uncracked spine, every page blank. She had left it on his bed that afternoon without saying anything about it. He had the sketchbook open to the first page. He had a pencil in his hand. At the top of the page, in careful clear letters, was a single word. Soren. He looked at it for a moment the way he always looked at things he had just made, checking whether it was right, whether it was what he meant. Then something settled in his face. The quiet kind of settled, the kind that means yes. He smiled. He picked up his pencil and began to draw. Outside, the station hummed its steady hum. The stars sat where they had always sat, unchanged, enormous, patient. Somewhere in the dark between them a Vorkai ship was moving toward home, carrying a clan elder who had a folded piece of paper in his chest pocket, and a hatchling who was holding a battered brown sketchbook with both forelimbs and was not going to put it down for a very long time. And in a kitchen on Caldenvale Station a small human boy drew until the lights went to their night cycle blue, filling the first pages of a new sketchbook, leaving something behind that would stay. The way things written down always stay. The way names, once given to paper, do not disappear.